Today we are talking about Ireland post-Viking invasions. And I'm going to do a little bit of recapping here just to make sure everyone remembers. When we last left, we had, the different Viking settlements in the various different port cities had pretty much established, but unlike in England, where the Vikings really spread out and overtook a lot of different lands and ended up, having half of the country, the Vikings in Ireland were pretty much restricted to kind of their port cities and the hinterlands surrounding. And a lot of that has to do with the political organization of Ireland and the fact that, you had all of these different kings who were prepared across the country to kind of fight back against these incursions. So we had, I discussed Brian Boru, and he had died after the Battle of Clontarf. And so what happens in Ireland after his death, I had mentioned that eventually over a couple of generations, his family starts to become known as the O'Briens, kind of in reference to him. So that's gonna be how I refer to that clan from now on. So after the death of Brian Boru, the O'Briens tried to maintain power in Munster and Leinster, and they attempted to create a more centralized power like it had been under Brian. They did this partly by keeping the other important families in the area fighting one another. And through this strategy, another O'Brien, Turlough O'Brien, was able to be recognized as the High King of Ireland from 1070 to 1086. After his death, however, the O'Briens declined in power as others grew. The O'Connors in Connaught, the O'Rourkes in Breffni, the MacMurroughs in Leinster, and the MacLaughlins in the Ulster areas all vied for each other for power, thus making centralization pretty impossible at this point. So with the invasions of the Vikings and the internal Irish clan disputes, the Church of Ireland, the church in Ireland had been pretty reduced. We had this growth of monastic orders, and you had Irish monks traveling to England and to Scotland and to France and Gaul and Austria and Italy. But during that Viking time period and these internal kind of Irish disruptions, the monastic influence abroad was dramatically smaller than what it had been in previous centuries. And Rome was getting concerned that Ireland was losing touch with the Christianity that Rome was propagating, and that Rome was concerned that the country would need reforming and to be brought back under the Roman Catholic discipline. They worried that the monasteries had grown morally lax and that they were victim to abuse. And so with the disruption of the Viking raids, Irish Christianity had developed without much organized influence from Rome for quite some time and was slightly different in practice and some beliefs as a result, as we've discussed in previous lectures. Ireland was a more spiritual, personal faith. It was more focused on the scriptures than it was on obedience to a centralized hierarchy and to Rome. This is why the monasteries were so popular in Ireland and not dioceses or bishoprics. Even as early as the mid-600s, the difference between the Roman and the Irish churches was evident. Remember, I talked about the dating of Easter and the way that the monks wore their hair, the tonsure. All of those things were different. And these differences led the Roman hierarchy to be concerned about possible heresies that were developing within the Irish church without the guidance of Rome to shepherd them down the correct path. By the mid-1000s, so the turn of the millennia, by the mid-1000s, Rome was undergoing a number of changes itself. Pope Gregory VII, which some of you have probably heard of, Pope Gregory the Great, he's known as, sought to reform the church from within and to assert papal authority over all church matters, especially over that of secular rulers and secular concerns. Gregory VII argued that the church's papal primacy meant the subordination of all secular governments to papal authority as long as they were Christian. So if you were a Christian king, you were subordinate to the papacy. This is the argument that Pope Gregory VII is making. This whole idea of church primacy and papal authority included strengthening the church's ecclesiastical hierarchy, something that was severely lacking in Ireland. You may also remember Pope Gregory VII, from the investiture controversy that he had with King Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor. Gregory was obviously very concerned about papal authority and the appointing of bishops and priests and things like that. But he was also really concerned with simony, which is the practice of selling church positions for money or for bribery or for favors, that sort of thing. And he was also really concerned with clerical celibacy as well. Marriage and concubinage among the lower ranks of the clergy was customary in the Western Church at this time, although it had already been forbidden in the Council of Nicaea that had happened in 325. It was still a really widely practiced thing. Priests had families. Remember, our Irish monks had families that lived in the communities that surrounded the monasteries. It was just a very common thing. Gregory sought to eliminate this behavior at all costs. He held several synods at the Lateran, including one in 1074, which required that all clerics to make a vow of celibacy upon their ordination, which essentially would then forbid any lay people from attending masses or receiving sacraments from unchaste clerics. So this put the burden of enforcing clerical chastity on the bishops in those local areas, and then the people who lived in that church diocese. And the priests who were offending, who were being unchaste, would be suspended if they were practicing unchaste practices. And the bishops who were supposed to be enforcing this, they could be suspended if they were found to be tolerating this unchaste behavior. The Pope even enlisted the aid of different abbots and nobles in bringing reluctant bishops to heel. In the year 1080, there was strict clerical celibacy that was kind of issued across the board, and it was starting to become a more accepted practice in the Western Church during Pope Gregory VII's reign. So they're trying to put the kibosh on unchaste priests. They're trying to put the kibosh on secular rulers, appointing bishops, appointing priests, appointing abbots. The church is really trying to make sure that the church is being run and controlled by the church and taking the secular roles out of it. And Ireland has no hierarchy within the church, essentially. It's just these monasteries. And yes, there are some bishops that are there, but they don't have that hierarchical system behind them to back them up. So Ireland is very different in this sense. And as we have already discussed last week when we were talking about the Vikings, when the Vikings settled in Ireland, a lot of them started to adopt Christianity as they stayed and settled within these port cities. And since the Vikings were centrally located in these port cities, where there could be more traditional patterns of ecclesiastical hierarchy structure, that sort of the church developed in these port cities far more than they developed in the interior of Ireland. And so those traditional structures of the church existed in the areas that the Hiberno-Norse had settled. Actually, it was Cedric Silkenbeard, remember our King of Dublin who fought in the Battle of Clontarf. Cedric Silkenbeard actually established the first diocese in Ireland, in Dublin, in the early 11th century. And this was actually linked to the Archbishop of Canterbury, which could explain why the type of Christianity that's being practiced by our Vikings, the Hiberno-Norse, why their Christianity is slightly different from the Christianity practiced by the rest of the Irish. That link to the Archbishop of Canterbury could be a reason, because maybe they're getting their priests from there. They're more connected communication-wise to the church that's more connected to Rome, whereas the rest of Ireland is not really in that much communication with Rome at this point. But the Hiberno-Norse Christians that are practicing Christianity in Ireland, in these port cities, start expressing concern that the Christianity that they're practicing is quite different from the Christianity practiced by the native Irish. And so we start seeing a number of these large church gatherings, these synods, church meetings, are being held in Ireland from around 1101. And then the last one that we're going to talk about was held, it was the Synod of Kells Mellifont and that was held in 1152. So we have about a 50-year period where there's about 6 or 7 of these church meetings, and they're attended by a bunch of bishops, a lot of priests, but they're also attended by a number of high-ranking laymen, as well as just normal laymen who have concerns about the church. So we're looking at like hundreds of people that are attending these different church meetings, and it varies from people within the church structure itself, all the way down to just normal lay people who are attending. Now, the purpose of these synods was to bring the Irish church into alignment with the Roman church, with its hierarchy. They wanted to establish an episcopal structure within Ireland that thus far had not been established. So it was decided upon over the course of these 50 years that 4 archbishoprics would be created in Ireland. Our first is in Armagh, and you can see on the map here that I've pointed kind of the regions that these archbishoprics had a control of. I don't want to use a specific map because these changed quite a bit, so I just want you to think of regionally. So our first one is in Armagh. Our second one is in Cashel, which is in Munster. We have Trom, which is located in Connacht. And then our fourth one is located in Dublin, which is the kind of the original one. Now, the primacy of Ireland was given over to Armagh because of its close connections to St. Patrick. The 4 archbishoprics were then to rule over 36 dioceses, which covered the entire island, with a church bureaucracy put in place to administer the church. And now these 36 dioceses corresponded roughly with tribal lands of some of the more powerful Irish clans. But remember what I said before about there not being strict territorial borders because of a lot of, there's still nomadic in a sense because we are following these large cattle herds and sheep herds. So it's, again, kind of rough estimates of where these territorial lands are located. So the people who are really important at this time period include Turlough O'Connor. He is the king of Connacht. And during the last synod in 1152, he's actually the recognized High King of Ireland. So Turlough O'Connor, along with Giovanni, Cardinal Paparoni, who was the papal legate for the Pope at the time, they approved the establishment of this church episcopal hierarchy system in Ireland. So this restructuring of the church actually helped facilitate a whole nother wave of cultural production, and we see more Irish literature being written down in the manuscripts. We see more manuscripts being brought into Ireland as well to be copied. With the influx of these different church synods, we saw a lot of new continental monasteries sending people over to Ireland to kind of learn Irish practices. So we see a bunch of Cistercian monks actually coming into Ireland. And so they're bringing manuscripts with them from their home monasteries. And these manuscripts are being copied by the Irish monks as well. And there's a lot of exchange that's happening. Now, the influx of these continental monastic orders, like St. Bernard of Clairvaux's Cistercians, did help increase the number of the manuscripts produced in Ireland. But they were also hoping, the church reformers were also hoping that these upstanding monks that had been trained in St. Bernard style of monasticism, they were really hoping that they would maybe influence Irish conduct and that they would help kind of reform the Irish monasteries while they were staying in them. That doesn't necessarily seem to be the case. The accounts from these monks that they sent back are quite interesting, and they tell of the failings of Irish moral behavior, and they're described very colorfully by St. Bernard of Clairvaux in his, and he was writing a book about one of a saint who'd been at the time, and so he's describing what these monks over in Ireland are telling him about what's happening. And he writes that, that there is a prevalence of married monks and priests that are living in concubinage throughout Ireland, and that these practices are very offensive to the Cistercians. So even though we had this 50 years of church meetings trying to reform the Irish church, we still see these practices being prevalent in Ireland. It's hard to change 700 years of religious practices. And probably as a response to these failed church reforms, we see the next pope, Pope Adrian the Fourth. He's the first and only English pope ever elected to the papacy. He issues a papal bull called Laudabilior. He issues this in 1155. Now, the authenticity of this papal bull, Laudabilior, has been debated. Some people say it wasn't official or that it was a fake, that it was written later to explain the Irish invasion of the English invasion of Ireland. But it's referenced by a number of contemporary sources, so it's pretty positive that Laudabilior is authentic. And so I just want to bring that up, but we're just going to assume it's authentic for the purposes of this lecture. In this bull, and this was one of the primary sources that I provided to you guys in that OneDrive or in that Dropbox. This papal bull, it was written in 1155. And in the bull, the Pope says that the newly crowned King Henry II of England had expressed a desire to enter the island of Ireland in order to subject it to law and order and root out the weeds of vice and to maintain the rights of the church. Pope Adrian then grants lordship over the island to Henry as long as the rights of the church are upheld and the rights are maintained throughout the entire island, and that probably more importantly, that tithes are then being paid to Rome. So we see this effort by the church to kind of reform the Catholic Church within Ireland. And, efforts are going well, and then it doesn't seem to be happening as fast. And then we see a pope essentially granting the entire island of Ireland over to a king who promises that he will bring Ireland back into the fold of the church. So this papal bull is pretty important, and it influences a lot of what we're going to be talking about coming up next. Okay. So effectively, the papal bull grants Ireland as a fiefdom to the King of England. Now, we haven't talked about King Henry II of England just yet, and he is quite an interesting person. So I'm going to give a little small spiel on him. If anyone is ever interested in hearing more, let me know. I'm debating doing a medieval England class in the spring, so maybe that's something I can go on to later. But Henry II doesn't act on this papal bull. It's like he gets it, he knows that he can use it, and he just tucks it away for a more convenient time. So the reason he probably doesn't act on it right away is that he's 21 years old, and he had just recently become the King of England in December 1154. So not even a year had he been crowned king when he gets this papal bull. But Henry's not just the King of England. He's the Duke of Normandy. He's the Count of Anjou. And then through marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, he married her in 1152. She had recently gotten divorced from the King of France, not a big deal. But through his marriage to her, he's also the Duke of Aquitaine, the Duke of Gascony, the Count of Poitou, and the lord of a number of smaller regions within kind of those French lands. So through this marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, he gains huge territories on the continent. But again, this is kind of beyond the scope of this class, but with this marriage to Eleanor, he also, because he takes all of these lands in France, he also becomes a subordinate to the King of France. So he holds the dukedoms of Aquitaine and Gascony and Poitou and all these other regions at the French king's leisure. So there's a complicated feudal relationship that Henry has with the King of France, but then at the same time, he's also the King of England. So he's the equal of the King of France. So it's a very complicated situation that we have going on, and family stuff and ex-in-laws, and we're going to see this in a little bit, how this kind of falls out. But anyways, Henry in 1155 has enough on his plate to deal with without adding Ireland onto it. So Ireland's not even a priority or a viable option for him in 1155. However, over the course of the next 15 years, we're going to see events unfold in such a way that make Pope Adrian's Laudabiliar Bull an important weapon in King Henry's spiritual as well as military arsenal. The culmination of Henry's own battles asserting royal authority over church affairs and the infighting between rival Irish kings over the High Kingship of Ireland led to Henry II invading Ireland in 1171. So there's a whole culmination of things that kind of lead to this. Now, to understand how Ireland went from an island that had absorbed and changed Christianity and Norsemen and wove each of those cultures into the unique fabric of Irish culture to one that had their independence taken away in a matter of decades, we need to lay out the political situation in Ireland leading up to the Anglo-Norman invasion. And there's several key players in Ireland at this time that I want to discuss. So our first and probably the most important figure in this is Diarmaid MacMurrough. Diarmaid is the King of Leinster, and he's going to be our chief bad guy in this story. And then next we have Rory O'Connor. He's the King of Connaught, and in 1166 he's made the High King of Ireland. So he's from a very important family, very important figure. His father was the High King of Ireland previous to him. And we also have Tiernan O'Rourke, who is the King of Breffni. Now, Tiernan O'Rourke is going to be an important figure that we're going to talk about. And he kind of is the catalyst for some of these events that happen. And then our other really important person is sorry, I'm going to pronounce this correctly, Muirchertach MacLaughlin. Now, MacLaughlin, because I'm going to say that because I can pronounce it much better than his first name. MacLaughlin is the King of Ulster, and he's actually the High King of Ireland from 1156 to 1166. So we're going to see Rory O'Connor take over as High King after MacLaughlin loses it. And he actually, MacLaughlin takes over the High Kingship after Rory O'Connor's father had passed away. So it kind of goes back and forth between these two families a couple of times. Now, you'll note that from this list is the very important family of the O'Briens, who were ruling in Munster, that they're missing from this list. Why aren't they important figures? When Rory O'Connor's father, Tardilbach, became High King of Ireland in 1118, he set about a process of weakening his rivals. What he did with the O'Briens is he supported another family in Munster, the McCarthys, and he supported them and put them in kingship in the area of Desmond. So if you look at the map, Desmond is in the southern part of Munster. And he supported them in opposition to the O'Briens, who were ruling out of the kind of the center part of Munster, known as Tormond, or near the city of Limerick, as you can see on the map. This effectively divides the kingdom of Munster. We have a battle that happens between the O'Briens and the McCarthy clans that happens in 1151. And that battle just shattered O'Brien's ability to assert any overarching power over all of Munster beyond their own territorial lands. So what O'Connor, the High King of Ireland at this time, what he effectively did was just take Munster off the list of powerful lords in Ireland at this time. So he really effectively weakened Munster as a rival. And so, as I just mentioned, this High King, Tardilbach O'Connor, comes into power in 1118. And as I just described, he goes about weakening the power of these other powerful clans around him. And once he does that in certain areas, what he does is he appoints his own children to positions of power through these vacated power struggles that he creates. So he effectively broke the O'Briens in Munster, and he starts to try to do the same thing with the kingship of Meath. And he's quite successful. So he appoints his eldest son, and it's his eldest son out of 20 sons. We can definitely tell that Tardilbach had a number of these marriages and divorces. That's the only way he could have had these many legitimate sons. So he had kind of forced the king of Meath out of power, and he appointed one of his sons, his heir, to the kingship of Meath. However, his son was assassinated by one of the smaller kings. Remember how we have, we have the Rees, and then we've got the Ree Moors, so like the higher kings, and then you've got those territorial kings. So one of these lower kings in Meath actually assassinated O'Connor's son because he opposed this overlordship of the O'Connors into Meath. And O'Connor decided to learn from this lesson, and he, instead of appointing another one of his 19 surviving sons, instead decided to split Meath into 3 parts. The northern third he gave to the powers of the O'Neills, so up in Ulster. So that would have been MacLaughlin's. So MacLaughlin clan gets a third of Meath. The remaining 2/3 are divided between O'Rourke, the king of Breffni, to the west. And then the other third is given to the king of Leinster in the south. So that would be Diarmait and then Rory O'Connor are splitting this. So we're seeing kind of these really important territories being fought over by a variety of different people. But this splitting up of Meath into 3s effectively removes Meath as a power player in this perpetual game of politics that we see going on in Ireland. However, it does create a whole new battleground for the king of Leinster, Diarmait, and O'Rourke, the king of Breffni, to fight over. And they continuously fight over the border between their supposed thirds of Meath, steadily from about 1144, when this split was done, to about 1152, when a tipping point is reached. And we're going to talk about that now. Now, O'Connor's high kingship was coming under challenge by MacLaughlin in the 1140s and then in the 1150s. Oh, I should probably change the slide here. Sorry. Okay. So we have O'Connor as the High King of Ireland, but MacLaughlin is kind of pushing to assert his control over the High Kingship as well. So there's always a challenge. The High King is never fully acknowledged or accepted by everyone in Ireland at any time. What had happened under Brian Boru was very unique, and we see all of these High Kings of Ireland after him trying to attain that same unity of the island, but it's really hard to achieve, obviously. So MacLaughlin is fighting against O'Connor for this High Kingship. And in 1147, MacLaughlin forces O'Rourke through a series of battles to submit to the overlordship of MacLaughlin. And he forces O'Rourke to hand over a number of hostages. So these would have been children, they would have been important heirs to other families in his clans, that sort of thing. And then in 1149, MacLaughlin actually marches some of his troops south, and he forces the submission of the Hiberno Norse in Dublin. So the king of Dublin actually submits to MacLaughlin as well. And if you could see, Dublin is not next door to MacLaughlin's lands. So obviously MacLaughlin is able to really kind of exert a great amount of power at this time period. And he also accepts hostages from the Hiberno Norse in Dublin as well. And part of that marching south is he forces the submission of Diarmait, the king of Leinster, also. So there's a lot of changing power lines and allies going on at this point. But now that Diarmait has submitted to MacLaughlin, he sees Diarmait sees MacLaughlin as an ally in his fight against O'Rourke for these lands of Meath. I didn't explain this before, but I probably should elaborate on it now. I've talked about previously about how Ireland doesn't have a lot of arable lands. It's a lot of hillsides, bogs, forests. We don't see a lot of, maybe about 15% of the countryside is made up of arable lands that could be farmed easily. And a lot of that 15% of arable land is located in Meath. So it's a very important place. That's why so many people are fighting over Meath at this time period. So Diarmait is allied with MacLaughlin now, and he's using that ally to agitate more against O'Connor, the current High King of Ireland, against his ally, O'Rourke, who's that King of Breffni. Remember, we had that split of Meath, and O'Rourke with Breffni has that other third of the land. We see with this submission of Leinster, with the submission of O'Rourke, with the submission of the Dublin Hiberno Norse, the High Kingship effectively switches, and MacLauchlan at this point is now proclaiming himself as the High King of Ireland, and O'Connors have lost this kingship. So in 1152, Diarmait makes a power play against this King of Breffni. In 1152, Diarmait kidnaps O'Rourke's wife, Dervla, and he not only kidnaps the wife of O'Rourke, but he takes a large herd of cattle that had supposedly been under her keeping as well, and he herds them all back to his lands in Leinster. So a cattle raid had happened, and a wife stealing had happened, and O'Rourke is away, either fighting a battle or making pilgrimage to a special site devoted to St. Patrick. His location depends on which source you read about this time period. The Annals of the Four Masters, so some of our primary sources that tell us about this time period, they describe the event of this cattle raid and wife stealing as this. On the occasion, Dervla, daughter of Mal Schnell, who would have been our former ruler of Meath, and wife of Tiernan O'Rourke, was brought away by the King of Leinster with her cattle and her furniture, and he took her according to the advice of her brother, Mal Schnell. So that is what the Annals of the Four Masters tell us. It doesn't say necessarily that it was a violent kidnapping, but it also suggests that it was a planned thing, that her family had instructed this to happen. And that's an interesting theory, and I'm not going to delve too deeply into it. But we also have a version of this story coming from the Anglo-Normans that it's told a little bit later that presents this very differently. And I'm going to read this version of it, and then I'll talk a little bit about why that's important. So the same story is told by Gerald of Wales, who is another one of the primary sources that I provided for you guys if you wanted to read. He's a court chronicler for Henry II, the King of England we discussed already. So he tells us, O'Rourke, Prince of Meath, having gone on an expedition into a distant quarter, left his wife, Dervla, in a certain island in Meath during his absence, and she, who had long entertained a passion for Dermot, took advantage of the absence of her husband and allowed herself to be ravaged, not against her will. As the nature of woman is fickle and given to change, she thus became the prey of her spoiler by her own contrivance. For as Mark Antony and Troy are witnesses, almost all the greatest evils in the world have arisen from women, unquote. So this is a version of the story that the court chronicler for the King of England recounts and gets published and is spread around Europe. This idea of the woman creating this problem, remember we had talked about Cedric Silkenbeard's mother before, and Gormaith, and how she had married all of these different important political rulers in Ireland, and how she was sort of blamed for this war between Brian Boru and the King of Leinster at that time, and the King of Dublin. So there's this idea of kind of blaming some of these political turmoils that are happening in Ireland on one particular person, and that one particular person is a woman who can't control her sexual urges, apparently. It's an easy excuse to explain a very complicated situation. And this situation between O'Rourke, O'Connor, O'Loughlin, and Diarmait, the King of Leinster, is an extremely complicated political situation that's going on. And it's hard to explain, but whatever the truth behind this disappearance of O'Rourke's wife, Dervla, it left O'Rourke disgraced and seeking revenge. He's able to recover his wife about a year later, and apparently takes her back. So whatever the truth was, he either accepted it or realized that it was part of politics. But he wasn't able to get his revenge on Diarmait for another 13 years. And this is because Diarmait is allied with MacLachlan, who, as I said before, is now the High King of Ireland. So there's these political tensions that are going on. When the High King MacLachlan is killed in battle in 1166, O'Rourke is able to seize this time as an opportunity for him to seek revenge. So now that Diarmait is politically exposed by the death of this ally, O'Rourke, after 13 years, is able to get revenge for the theft of his wife, and maybe even more importantly, the theft of that herd of cattle, which we can only imagine how much that was worth at the time. So O'Rourke goes to Rory O'Connor, who is the king of Connaught at the time, and they ally together in 1166. Rory wants the lands of Leinster, and he also wants the support of O'Rourke for his new bid for high kingship. He wants the high kingship. His father had it before MacLachlan had taken it away from him. So Rory wants that back. So Rory allies with O'Rourke to get this chance for the high kingship, to maybe get some of these juicy lands of Leinster. And O'Rourke wants to ally with him, for this ability to have revenge and to maybe get some more of those lands in Meath, which we know are really important lands. So together they ally, and their army sweeps in to Diarmait's lands, so the lands of Leinster, and they're able to defeat Diarmait. Rory becomes the High King with the support of O'Rourke behind him, and Diarmait tries to kind of come back from this defeat. He tries to ally with the Hibernal Norse chieftains that are located in Dublin, but they don't want to ally with him. They can see the way that the wind is blowing, so they actually ally with O'Connor. And because he's not able to find anyone to support him, and we see these armies of O'Connor and O'Rourke that are already invading into Leinster, Diarmait is essentially forced into exile out of Ireland. And now it's not uncommon for these various kings of varying degrees to be exiled out of Ireland. And it's also not uncommon for them to seek foreign intervention to retake those lands. Remember, we had our Hibernal Norse in Dublin that sought help from other Vikings in York, at the Isle of Man, in various other locations. We see this happens pretty often. But what makes what Diarmait does next so uncommon is that he doesn't just seek foreign intervention. He agrees to submit to the overlordship of a foreign king in exchange for military assistance. And we'll talk about that in more detail in just a moment. So this death of MacLachlan, the previous High King of Ireland, can kind of be seen as a tipping point that makes the invasion of the Anglo-Normans into Ireland possible. So a lot of political plans and machinations are coming together at this time. So Diarmait, our former king of Leinster, is exiled out of Ireland. And what he does is he travels to England to seek support from King Henry II. He had previous interactions with King Henry before. King Henry had been trying to solidify his control over Northern England, and he'd been fighting against the King of Scots. And Diarmait had actually sent some fighters and some ships to help King Henry. So he was hoping that King Henry would be willing to help him in return. So Diarmait travels to England to talk to Henry. However, Henry is currently in Aquitaine dealing with his wives' lands. So Diarmait again crosses the channel and travels to Aquitaine to meet with Henry. And once he arrives at the court of Aquitaine, through Gerald of Wales, we see the interaction between Diarmait and King Henry. What we're told is that Diarmait offered to become Henry's liegeman and vassal if Henry would help him retake his lands in Ireland. So essentially, he's saying that Henry would, in reality, hold all of the lands that Diarmait wants to take back but it's the agreement that Henry would allow Diarmait to hold those lands in exchange for loyalty and kind of feudal back and forth dues, that sort of thing. So this is unique. It's essentially giving someone else outside of Ireland an invitation to come in and hold those lands. So that's why this is a little bit different from what happens with the Vikings and Christianity and other invading forces. So this would give Henry lordship over any lands that Diarmait is able to win back with the support of Henry. And from the Chronicles' point of view, from Gerald of Wales' writings, it sounds like Diarmait is fully aware of what he's doing, that he is handing over the lands of Ireland to Henry, essentially. What Henry does is he gives Diarmait letters that authorize him to recruit from Henry's vassals for military support to win back his kingdom. Henry, at this point, is still not interested in getting involved in Ireland personally. He has much bigger issues on the continent to deal with. It isn't until a few more years later when the motivation to conquer Ireland pushes Henry to action. He certainly isn't against some of his lords enriching themselves with Irish lands and wealth, though, and getting that prestige on himself. So what Diarmait does is he takes these letters that Henry grants him, and he goes to Wales, where Henry suggested he go and look, because again, Wales is closely located to Ireland across the sea. And Diarmait goes and he pleads his case with a number of the powerful Marcher lords who are there. And one of those Marcher lords is Richard de Clare, the Earl of Pembroke, and he's known to history as Strongbow. And he's actually the most powerful lord who agrees to support Diarmait. Diarmait promises Strongbow the hand of his daughter, Aoife, and he also promises that when Diarmait dies, that Strongbow will inherit his title and his lands. So when Diarmait dies, Strongbow will become King of Leinster if Strongbow helps Diarmait take back his kingship. So it's a very enticing offer that he's being given here. But this promise of inheriting the kingship is pretty questionable. Diarmait had several living sons in addition to his daughter, Aoife. And there are no laws within Brehon law that allow for this just blatant transference of inheritance and writing out these legitimate sons. There's no law that covers that. So whether or not this is even legal is very questionable. But regardless, Strongbow is interested. Other lords that agree to help out include Robert Fitzstephen, Maurice de Pendergast. Both of these are offered rich rewards. I think Pendergast and Fitzstephen's are offered Wexford if they take it. So a very wealthy port city, lots of taxes and import taxes from trade. And so with getting a number of these lords to agree to help out, Diarmait returns to Ireland, even though he'd been exiled. He returns to Ireland in August 1167, and he waits for his English or his Anglo-Norman allies to follow him. When he returns to Ireland, he actually does have a small force of men that from Wales that agree to help him out. So he lands with this small force, but he doesn't have an army by any means. Unfortunately, that doesn't stop him from getting involved in a couple of battles as soon as he arrives back in Ireland. So Diarmait lands, and he unwisely ends up in a battle against O'Rourke and O'Connor. So he's facing the forces of the High King of Ireland and the King of Breffni. Surprisingly enough, he loses both of these battles, and Diarmait agrees to hand over hostages, and he pays a large sum of gold to O'Rourke in exchange, sort of that honor price for stealing O'Rourke's wife. But with this, O'Connor agrees to let Diarmait stay and remain as King of Leinster if he promises to maintain the peace and, hands over hostages, that sort of thing. O'Rourke and O'Connor agreed to this without realizing that who Diarmait had with him now, those soldiers, those fighters, was just the tip of the iceberg. They had no idea who was going to be arriving at their shores within the next couple of months. So this agreement would not have gone forward had they been aware of what was going to happen soon. So what followed Diarmait's actions, what resulted from Diarmait's actions can be described as nothing less of an invasion, followed by a conquest. The Anglo-Saxon or the Anglo-Normans that Diarmait contracted to aid him in retaking his lands were not interested in putting their lives and the lives of their fighting men at risk for just a small amount of gold and maybe some lands. They wanted to carve out power bases for themselves in Ireland, and they did. Many of the knights that agreed to fight for Diarmait were younger sons. They were not expected to inherit lands from their fathers because, again, primogeniture, everything goes to the eldest son. So these younger sons needed to find their own lands and make their own way in the world. And Ireland looked pretty good for that. So, initially Diarmait comes back. He loses in those couple of battles to O'Rourke and to O'Connor, but he doesn't have to wait long. In May 1169, the second installment of the Anglo-Norman allies arrive in Ireland. Initially, as I had said, O'Rourke, O'Connor, these other local kings were not alarmed by the force that Diarmait came over with originally. And again, when the second installment of fighters arrives in May, they're really not that concerned either, because the force is only about 500 Anglo-Norman soldiers. We've got, I think that there was maybe 50 or 60 like really well-trained knights. And then we have all of the retinue that goes with a knight. You have their squires, you've got, various footmen that fight with them. And then we have a lot of archers that came over with the second installment as well. And so it doesn't look like it's that powerful of a force. And so the local Irish kings are really not that concerned with what's happening. Again, they were able to handle those Viking invasions, and this just looks like another contingent of people that are looking for land and nothing that special. What they don't realize is that the Anglo-Norman lords and their fighting forces are some of the most highly trained soldiers in Europe at this time period. The Crusades are already happening at this time period, and many of these men that have that are going over to Ireland now have either fought in the Holy Lands, or they've been trained by men who have fought there. And so they're experienced in a number of different styles of battle. They have very good armor. They have good weapons. They are extremely well trained. They've got great horses, siege engines. All of these things that go into war making on the continent are being brought over to Ireland, and Ireland is just not prepared for that.